The National Heroin Task Force reports that as of 2014, in the United States, on average, one person died every 20 minutes as a result of opioid and/or heroin overdose. And nationally, heroin-related overdose deaths increased by 406% between 2006 and 2014. In Massachusetts, our communities and our families have been devastated by this epidemic. It's taken far too many lives. It reaches into all of our neighborhoods. It's killing people of all ages, all backgrounds, and all professions. Across the Commonwealth, public safety and public health officials are working together with service providers to combat this epidemic. This series, Breaking the Cycle, is a collaborative effort between the Plymouth County Sheriff's Department and Office of the District Attorney to talk about this crisis and the services and supports to all of us facing the impacts. Plymouth County District Attorney Timothy Cruz and Plymouth County Sheriff Joseph McDonald formed the Plymouth County Drug Abuse Task Force in August 2015. Their mission is to bring community leaders together to provide treatment solutions for people impacted by substance use disorders. Gentlemen, welcome today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us, Donna.
We are honored to be able to work with you. This is such an important show and such important information to get out to everyone. We know there's a national task force, there's a statewide task force, and now the Plymouth County. Can you tell us what made the two of you decide to work together to develop this task force?
Yeah, I think that myself and the sheriff were talking about this, and we looked at a lot of the situations that we're dealing with, him at the jail and myself in the prosecution of cases, and we figured that we have to do something, I think, a little bit outside the box because of the fact that we're going to need to deal with really a non-traditional role of the sheriff and a non-traditional role of the prosecutor. And what can we do to try to get in front of this terrible epidemic? What we've seen in our county, unfortunately, since the decriminalization of marijuana back in 2008, we've seen our opiate overdoses, fatal opiate overdoses, increase every year but one. So we need to figure out a way to work together and put all the stakeholders that are important in our community together, and how can we face this crisis together and deal with it.
And as you said, it's not just dealing with it from a legal point of view, it's not just dealing with it from a criminal point of view, it's a holistic approach that you really need to take with everybody in the community working together.
It's a quality of life issue, really. It's a human issue. And you had asked how it is we came to work together. It really is a natural fit. The DA and I have worked on so many things together. Before I was the sheriff, I was actually an assistant DA for 9 years. So we had a great working relationship for all that time. And I had the privilege of being asked by the governor to serve on his working group. I learned a tremendous amount, and just since I've been sheriff the last 12 years, I've learned a tremendous amount about what it means to have to deal with these drug addiction issues and how directly that affects not just our prison population, but our population at large, because for every person that is doing time in the House of Correction, there is a family that is without that person, their company, their counsel, their work. It impacts all of us.
And I think that's something that's important to establish from the very beginning, because there is still a level of people not wanting to talk about this problem, or there being some stigma attached to the problem, but it truly has impacted all of our neighborhoods, all of our communities, all of our residents. Can you tell us a little bit, and I know the numbers are hard, but can you tell us a little bit about what we're truly dealing with right now?
Well, what we're dealing with here in our county anyways, and part and parcel of the district attorney's office, is that we have state police unit that investigates all the homicides that occur in our county, and they also respond to all the unattended deaths, is what they're called, people who may pass not in a hospital, not in some sort of facility such as that. So what we've seen over the years, our numbers continue to go up. And just in the last 3 years, back in 2014, 2013, we were at 45. And in 2015, we were at 75. And right now, last year, we were dealing with 142 fatal overdoses in Plymouth County. As we speak right now, there's 66 in our county this year so far. And those are just the numbers that we know about from the state police going up with the local police and the deputy sheriffs to these scenes. What we don't know is how many people are actually dying from the drug itself that are going to hospitals that we never know about. And so trying to get our arms around the real information, the real data. How bad is this problem? Because I think the problem is worse than what we know, and that's really hard to imagine with the numbers and the statistics that show us the direction that we're going.
Now, tell me, with I know the task force, one of the key things you want to do is really get a handle on exactly what you're dealing with, number one, but then number two, bring community leaders and support organizations together to be able to work on this together at countywide and statewide ultimately. Tell me, how did you organize the task force initially? What types of people do you bring in? What types of organizations are supporting the task force?
Well, we have a number, and we have public safety, and we have committees and subcommittees, and so we've brought in people for public safety. We have Police Chief Mike Botteri from Plymouth is involved in it, and he's working also in conjunction with other police chiefs. And he's had subcommittee meetings as what is the best practices going on now for the local police chiefs in our county. And I think Plymouth, Carver, and Middleborough are actually together right now working on how to deal with individuals who may overdose and how the police respond. And Plymouth, I think, is doing a great job going to homes the next day of individuals who may have overdosed and bringing information to them, information of help, information of what can we do to help you get a bed, what can we do to help you to go to the next step. And then we look at those three communities and we compare them also to other communities that are, let's say in East Bridgewater Hope, which has a place where a church that Chief Cowan and new Chief Police Scott Allen coming in, the program that they're doing, I think, is also something that every town in our county can look at and use that as a model. And that's what we're trying to do, create that model. What is the best practice? And I think in public safety, working with those police chiefs, the people who are hands-on, who are working with a lot of the EMTs or the first responders to these individuals who are under the influence, that's one way that we can try to get that practice out to our other chiefs and see how they can all respond.
And I think it's a good example of what you've already said, that this epidemic is really leading all of you and all of our public safety officials to really look at their jobs perhaps differently and incorporate different practices. So it's not necessarily about criminalizing the problem,
right.
and you had talked about that, Sheriff, as well, but I think the Plymouth Police Department example of doing outreach really is an example of, of helping people to find the supports and services they need.
Absolutely. You know, it's not law enforcement so much as it's public safety. And public safety is a much larger umbrella. You've got that community caretaking aspect that the police and our healthcare providers are doing. And I recently had read that the Pioneer Institute recognized Peter Holden over at the Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital here in Plymouth with a Good Government Award for the work that they are doing with Plymouth Police in the aftermath of an overdose, where they're going to visit them at their homes in the day following, and they're having tremendous success rates getting people into treatment beds.
Can you describe that a little bit? Because I don't know that everybody watching understands exactly what they're doing through that outreach.
Sure, yeah, it's a collaboration between the Plymouth Police Department, Chief Botteri is behind this, and the Beth Israel Deaconess, Peter Holden. And what happens is when someone is brought to an emergency room in an overdose situation, and usually they're in tremendous crisis, and when the drug Narcan is applied to essentially sometimes bring these people back to life, that's not really a great time for them to try and establish a conversation about what treatment options would be available. In fact, it sometimes can result in trauma to both sides, the caregiver and the patient. So what they're doing is they're waiting that 24-hour period. That person is discharged from the hospital. They will go to their homes, and the Plymouth police will go to that house with individuals from the caregiving side of the house, and they will attempt to get that person into treatment, and they'll give them their options and let them know what's out there and is available. And as I said, they're having tremendous success.
I've heard that the numbers are really remarkable, that even people who are refusing in the hospital, once the police go and they're going as plainclothes officers, they've already been in touch with social workers, they've already confirmed that there is a bed available, most importantly, in a treatment facility, and a longer-term treatment facility where people can get help. And when they go to homes, that's when people are opening the door and saying thank you, and are really more able, as you said, at the time of the overdose might not be able to accept the support, but the majority of people have been accepting the support and accepting the treatment when folks go to their homes.
It's been a tremendous success, and I applaud Plymouth Police, Chief Botteri, Peter Holden, and Beth Israel Deaconess here in Plymouth.
And this is just one example of ways that through the task force, different community groups are working together to be able to provide treatment. And there are so many things that we can talk about, and the fact that this episode is simply half an hour, you know, the entire series is going to be able to touch on all of the different areas of your task force. But could you talk a little bit more about some of the different groups that you've brought into the task force, in addition to public safety, in addition to Beth Israel, that are able to offer additional supports in making decisions moving forward?
Sure. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say that part of the health provision also is not just, we're lucky because it's Plymouth County, so therefore we have groups from around the county. So we're lucky to have Peter Holden as one of the co-chairs of our subcommittee, the health subcommittee, but he's also doing that in conjunction with Brockton Hospital, Signature Healthcare, with Dr. Dan Muse, who's the doctor at the emergency room in Brockton Hospital. And they're having their subcommittee meetings and they're exchanging information, and information like Joe just said as pertains to the Plymouth Police and what's the best practices for that. We continue to do things also with the education world. We're dealing with President Clark down at Bridgewater State University, as well as Quincy College Plymouth Dean Mary Burke. And we're trying to get, once again, best practices. So how do we get this into the schools, and how can we help kids before they go down this path? A much more involved process, and to say that I think there's a great program, but I think this would be much more expansive and trying to figure out what's being done on a national basis to try to get into the schools, what's the appropriate level to deal with kids, what level can they comprehend what's going on? Because our kids right now who are dealing with this, and I think as some of us have talked earlier, everybody's touched by this. Everybody. You can't find anybody who's not. I would challenge you to find somebody who doesn't know somebody who has either not been hooked on these drugs or their family has been touched by them. And on the other end of it, we're dealing with a lot of kids who are in really dangerous situations because they're becoming endangered because perhaps we're losing that generation, that parental generation, and we currently have grandparents getting in front of taking care of their grandkids, but more in a parent sort of way. So how do we help the kids? How do we help the grandparents, and also at the same time, how do we help the user of that drug? And I think that we have to continue to work together. The sheriff also should mention that he, through a lot of his own work, was able to get a number of additional beds at the Plymouth County Jail, where even though it's called a jail, it's really not a jail for some of these people. It's really a place to get that help that they so sorely need. But for a lot of his efforts in conjunction with the Secretary of the Executive Office of Public Safety, we wouldn't have those in Plymouth. And now we do, and I think that's another good step forward.
And I think the collaborative efforts to allow all of you to be flexible in providing the supports that are needed. Can you talk a little bit more, Sheriff, about what's going on at the jail? Because that
Sure.
truly is a huge opportunity, because one of the huge stresses, of my understanding, on all of our health and human services supports, in addition to, as you mentioned, DA, the challenges with organizations like DCF in providing care for children whose parents aren't able to care for them. And as you said, with the Sheriff's Department, people who are ending up in jail as well, but there aren't enough beds necessarily to provide the long-term care and support that's needed for people trying to fight these addictions.
Exactly true, Donna, and that was one of the findings of the governor's task force as well. At the jail, we have a history, a very long history, long before I became the sheriff, of very good and very effective drug treatment programs. I learned early on, I used to quantify, people would ask me, how many people are in jail as a result of drugs? And you can quantify that fairly easily through inmate management computer systems, how many people are there for drug possession, for the sale of drugs, the manufacture. But once I started to really think about this, I realized that the answer to that question is not that simple number. The answer is most people are in jail because of drugs and or alcohol substance abuse issues, because they are committing crimes of violence, committing property crimes that most of these people would never dream of doing but for the fact that they were under the influence of drugs or alcohol or attempting to get drugs or alcohol. So we at the jail have stressed that for many, many years. Great programs. And most recently, I appreciate the fact that you brought it up. We have gone online. Our populations as a whole, incarcerated populations, have been decreasing. This is statewide and actually nationally as well. So that's given us a little bit of space there, and it's secure space. It is space that is underutilized, or even in our case, unutilized. What we're able to do is partner with the Department of Corrections, and we've actually created a MASAC, a substance abuse unit, for people who haven't committed crimes, that are there civilly committed by a judge for treatment up to 90 days, and hopefully we're getting them into some good aftercare after that. But this is not a permanent solution by any means, but it's certainly a resource that we need to utilize because we have a tremendous problem right now.
And we've referenced on a couple of occasions the need for long-term support and perhaps inpatient support when recovering from opioid or heroin addiction. Could you talk a little bit to that and the reason that that might take a longer period of time than perhaps 30 days in a rehabilitation facility?
Well, I mean, I think that what we're finding out is, at least through the medical provision of it, is that once that drug is in your body, it's much harder to shake it because your body starts changing and your body starts craving that drug. So what we've seen, at least from my end of it and the prosecutorial side of it, we have individuals who are being arrested for crimes, like Joe said, whether it be crimes of violence, whether it be house breaks or car breaks, whatever. And now we have in our county, in 3 of our 4 district courts, we have drug courts, which have been put together. Most recently, Plymouth has probably been the first one that we had, and that's been up and running maybe 5 or 6 years now, I think it is. And all the drug courts are a little bit different, but it's also trying to provide a way and an outlet for individuals who, yeah, maybe you still have to be held accountable for your actions. And maybe you do have to do a little bit of jail time, but there's going to be something on the other end, including but not limited to making sure that you can get the rehabilitative services that you need. And what we see, unfortunately, it's not unusual for somebody not to succeed at the outset in that because it is such a terrible addiction to shake. And that the people that continue to go back and use this drug, I mean, I often think, I was talking to one of the doctors in the emergency room at Brockton Hospital, and he told me that, you know, when they had somebody who had overdosed, that they had kids showing up at the hospital that knew the young man that had overdosed. And what they were trying to find out was, what kind of heroin is he using? Because it was so strong and it brought them right to the edge. And you have to think of it for a second. What kind of a drug can bring you to the edge of your life? And that's what you're looking to do and voluntarily put in your body. That's how you know that a lot of this stuff is uncontrollable. Once it's in your body, you need to deal with it, and you have to react to the challenges and the changes that's going to happen. And you will do anything to go from a young kid who perhaps started either with prescription meds or maybe smoking a joint to all of a sudden you're sticking a needle in your arm and you're putting in 90 to 95% pure heroin into your body. And that stuff is going to kill you. Eventually, that's what's going to happen. It's going to kill you, or it's going to put you in jail and then kill you.
And sadly, as you alluded to, it changes your brain. They're finding that this drug, that opioids and heroin, literally change your brain function. So it is craving more and more. So sadly, the story you tell anecdotally is not just an anecdote. It's something that's happening all over the place all of the time.
Right.
So the treatment does need to be longer term. And I understand that the drug court, in addition to people being responsible for their actions and for their behaviors, it's a pretty tough program.
It really is.
It's a 2-year program of ongoing case management, support, oversight, and also working with public safety officials for drug testing and treatment throughout.
Yeah, I think it's very challenging, but I think it should be. And I think that that's something there that you want to make sure that somebody who's getting help is not in a position where they're going to go into rehab and they go back out. We see so many overdoses and even fatal overdoses from individuals once they leave rehab. You know, that's a very dangerous time period for them to go back out. And we talk to other people on our task force, whether it be Joanne Peterson from Learn to Cope, who's done a tremendous job bringing in a lot of different issues from her own personal experiences with her child many years back. She really is leading the charge with lots of trying to sit down and talk to people. I can get you help, because if you're a parent of a young boy or a young girl who's on this, I think the first question you have is, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I get help? How do you help the person that you would do anything for and you have no idea where to go? There are support groups out there, and there are people out there that can help you and lead you in that direction, whether it be East Bridgewater Hope that meets every other Thursday at a church in East Bridgewater, whether it be Learn to Cope or some other support group. There are groups here that can help direct you and help you where you can go for your child to try to make sure that they can get them in somewhere, get them into a bed. We are lucky that we have, the Independence Academy here, and it's in Brockton, but there's only 5 high schools, recovery high schools in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We have one here in Brockton that's dealing with kids who are addicted to drugs and making sure they can help them, and at the same time understand that they are kids and they've got to get through high school. You've got to get through high school, and that will help you. So we have so many, I think, different things going on right now, which is great. But having said that, the road is long, and we have to continue to persevere and bring everybody who needs a seat at the table, whether it be public safety, whether it be legislators who we have with us in this, whether it be the community-based coalitions that are going on, bringing in those different groups and making sure we can, how do we figure out, how do we get in front of it, how do we deal with the problem that we have right now, how do we help kids, what do we do with the people that are on it right now, and how do we go from here and really put an end to this epidemic.
And make changes moving forward.
And this is really what is at the heart of why Tim and I got together to create this task force. The idea here, I think the simplest way for us to put this is, how do we help the helpers? Those people in the community, who do you go to? Who can you turn to as a parent? Who can you turn to as a pastor? We have the faith-based community is involved with us as well. Reverend Paul Jaley from here in Plymouth. We want to make sure that those individuals who are in a position to help people in our individual communities know who to turn to or what to do. So to the extent that we can be a clearinghouse for that information, to be able to assist those, to help the helpers, as I had said, I think is the best way I can put it. And I think that a lot of good work gets done when we pull together like this. It's really been tremendous.
And I think that that's such a good example of the work that you're doing, that pulling in all of the different parts of the community, everybody who has a piece of being able to support people who are going through problems with addiction, people who are impacted by addiction through their families, through their schools, teachers, parents, all of the community working together to make changes. You're right, stopping the flood right now, I think, and then looking forward to what are the changes that we can make. How can we get to our children and educate them? I was reading studies, and through a coworker, she told me that the studies she read were, you can't start at 8th grade, you can't start at 9th grade in educating our children. We have to start at middle school. We have to start, there was a program at a local 4th grade classroom. We have to reach children early, that before they turn 25, their brains can be changed permanently. They need to know that this isn't something that, it's okay to try, as you said earlier, that isn't something that is social, that it's so important to be able to put your health at the forefront of your goals every day, and it's our responsibility to help change things for our next generation.
Right, and I think none of the young men or women that are addicted to the drug wake up and say, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Oh, I want to be a drug addict. No, it happened because, for a variety of reasons, but I think a lack of education on how dangerous this stuff is. The community that our kids grow up in now, which the social media push, which out there in every way you can look at it, other kids, just regular peer pressure from kids, try it. Just one won't hurt, and before you know it, you're down that path. Or are you also in a situation where perhaps you hurt your back in playing sports, or you did something else, you started on prescription medications? We have to make sure that we limit, and I think Governor Baker's done a good job limiting the amount that doctors are going to be prescribing for the drugs that are put out there. And also on the other end, if you do receive a script and you don't need the unwanted, unneeded, unnecessary medication, myself and the sheriff, at least in Plymouth County, have in every police department, we have medical disposal boxes where you can drop it off there, and they will take it and we'll bring it to Covanta. They'll destroy it. We keep track of everything to make sure that it all goes in, make sure it's destroyed in an environmentally safe way, and also make sure that the unnecessary and unneeded drugs are not back out there in the community, where kids can go to maybe their grandparents' home and maybe they're going through the medicine cabinet and they're going to find something. So we need to make sure on both ends, limit the amount out and also maximize the stuff we can get rid of.
In addition to the work that you're doing, I understand also Beth Israel Deaconess received a grant to be able to work with physicians in the Plymouth County area to really be able to, and the state is working on this at another level too, but really be able to monitor the opioids and the painkillers that are being prescribed and ensure that they're hopefully catching situations earlier for patients who are showing signs of a problem.
Right. And that's a great point that you raised on this and the previous commentary. Dealing with education. In law enforcement, I say in so many different areas, our most important and most powerful tool is information. And one of the things that blew me away when I was on the task force, one of the recommendations that we actually came up with as well, was how little I knew. And I thought I was somebody who had a good handle on this. But the medical community as well, I think, had their eyes opened. The requirements of instruction on the effects of these opioids in medical school were almost non-existent. So we've bolstered the prescription monitoring program. We've mandatory now, the Massachusetts Medical Society is going to be mandating increased educational opportunities for physicians who are writing these prescriptions. So I think if we can get the right information into the hands of the people who are in a position to deploy that information, good things are going to happen.
Absolutely. And this is, as you both said, this is a long-term issue and something that's going to take us a long time to be able to work together to start to resolve and to turn the tide. I'm going to bring up a controversial topic as we head towards the end of this program. We know there's a ballot question in the state of Massachusetts, in our Commonwealth, talking about the commercialization of marijuana that will go before voters in the fall. And there's been lots of opinion back and forth as to whether or not is marijuana a gateway drug, is it not? I'd be curious as to, you know, given the work that you gentlemen do every day, what is your opinion on this initiative?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
My opinion, I think, is largely going to mirror that of Tim, but having worked in the criminal justice system for over 20 years, I would state that my opinion is very clearly that marijuana is a gateway drug. I've had the opportunity to speak to many individuals who are currently incarcerated, many of whom were leaving and heading back into the communities. And I've asked them the question directly, and although I don't get any unanimity amongst them, I know what I hear. And when I've asked inmates who have dealt with drug problems and been in there on drug charges, the one thing, you know, that I think I've gleaned from this, they may agree or disagree that it's a gateway drug, but every person that I've talked to that's a heroin addict, although not every heroin addict or not every marijuana user becomes a heroin addict, every heroin addict I've ever spoken to started with marijuana. So I know what I see, and I see that it is a gateway drug.
We're in the worst crisis and epidemic, drug-wise, that I've ever seen with this heroin opiate craze right now. Why do our kids need to have marijuana readily available to them to benefit corporations who are going to make billions of dollars on the backs of our kids through edibles, through other things, through gummy bears, Swedish fish, whatever it may be, the candy? They're targeting our kids. That's where this is going. And we, as public safety, I believe, have an obligation and a responsibility to say it's time for us to stand up and say no more. Let us deal with what we're dealing with right now. Let us help people. Let us make sure that nobody gets hurt. And let's make sure that we don't make an irresponsible decision, and that's what this is, in my opinion, an irresponsible decision for the correct word, the commercialization for these corporations to make billions with a B of dollars.
Gentlemen, thank you both so much for joining us. This is clearly just the tip of the iceberg and the beginning of this conversation. In our next episode, you are going to be welcoming somebody from the Massachusetts Prevention Alliance to talk more specifically about this ballot initiative. And we'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for Breaking the Cycle. For more information, if you have questions, if you'd like to learn more, or if you or your family member needs support, we'll be providing contact information at the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us for Breaking the Cycle.